It says join as
So,
attendee.
um, see if it'll let you join as co-host.
It didn't.
All right.
It's the same format, looks like. It's got my name, but it doesn't have.
All right. Let me see if I can do anything on my end again to help share. Um, no, it's not letting me do it. It's the way the university's got this thing set up, so I'm not sure I can do it from my end. All right. Let's go ahead and we'll do it. And you can see the screen though, right, Susan and Dr. Moore?
I can I can see you. I can't see a screen.
Okay, I'm gonna get ready to take us
So
off
and
recording.
and I won't be able to share mine. I'll have to ask you to do it.
Yep, I got it. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for all the technology confusion there. Welcome to the National Association of State Park Directors webinar, our partnership with the NASPD and Clemson University. My name is Phil Gaines. I'm a professor of practice at Clemson University and the retired director of South Carolina. We're excited to have you here today. And today we're going to talk about a topic that I think is what these webinars are all about. It's a great example of how the NASPD board and the leadership envision these webinars to be. Today's forum is for learning, and one of our objectives, that we always talk about in park interpretation and education is that of provocation, and that's to stimulate people's thoughts and to be able to be inquisitive and ask more questions and to bring back information that could help us back home. So I think today is certainly that. So I'm gonna share the screen and we'll go ahead and get started and introduce um, some of our folks. And man, we're just having all kind of fun stuff here. All right. So today we're going to be talking about environmental justice in America's state parks and the opportunity to make a difference that we have not only nationally but back home in our states as well. So I'm assuming Susan and Dr. Moore, y'all can see uh, the slideshow, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So let's get started. Uh, we're very fortunate today to have two special guests with us, and I'll give you the quick rundown of that. Um, Today we have with us Dr. Katrina Moore, Katira, I'm sorry. I always get her name wrong. Uh, Katira Moore, who's with Delaware um, DNR, and we'll go and she'll talk a little bit more about her. But Dr. Moore is Delaware's first environmental justice coordinator. I heard Dr. Moore speak at a conference in Delaware, and I was fascinated by really what was environmental justice and what that meant for parks. And she did a fantastic job. And I asked if she would come and talk to America State Parks about some of the information that she shared in Delaware. She's an experienced educator who holds a doctorate in earth and environmental science with a specialization in geography from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. She's an urban geographer who uses an environmental justice lens to focus on and examine how social political structures contribute to the disparities that impact everyday life. So, Dr. Moore, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to you just a little bit and kind of build on that foundation of just what kind of lens should we be looking through as park professionals from around the country as we talk about environmental justice and what does that mean for us in America's state parks? Again, thank you for being with us, Dr. Moore. Dr. Moore, you there? Okay. Okay. All right. So we're gonna, Susan, I'm gonna jump over to you. I'm not sure what happened to Dr. Moore. Let me keep looking real quick. Okay, Dr. Moore's here. Um, Give me a second. I'm not sure what's happened here. I'm sorry. Apologize. She lost her microphone. So let's see what we can do. All right. Dr. Moore, you back with us? Okay. All right. Let's see what we can do. Dr. Moore has lost her microphone. So we're going to adjust and
Phil, this is Susan. Do you want me to
I'm,
kind of
I have
fill in
no
some
idea
space here?
what's happened here. I'm still here, but I don't know. Is my screen being shared?
Yep.
Well, here comes Dr. Moore. Hey. Okay. I'm trying. I apologize. And I know you've got to be somewhere too, so um I apologize. I'm trying. I'm not doing very well here, but I'm um well, since you don't have access, I'm not sure how we can do this. So um it does, and I'm trying to find. Okay, let me yep, I'm gonna put you on speaker, and then for
Perfect.
some reason my all right, I'm gonna move my microphone around, and I'm gonna.
Can you hear me, Susan?
I can, Dr. Moore. I'm glad to hear your voice.
Okay, I'm gonna try that. So I'm gonna just mute my speakers so that I'm like not backseating. Wait a minute, let me mute my speakers. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna just talk. So I can't hear myself coming through because I muted my computer speaker, so it's not a backseat. So I'll just get started. Okay, so I was going to spend a little bit of time, thinking about, and the talk that Dr. Gaines saw me give was about customer service and how it really comes down to environmental justice. Because really good customer service is good environmental justice. You find that good communication, transparent communication, all of these things kind of help forward environmental justice. And so for those that may not be familiar, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, and the equitable access to green spaces, public recreation opportunities, resilience to extreme weather, and information and data on potential exposures to environmental hazards. And that's kind of how we've kind of defined it here at DNREC, because the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, we have environmental control where we're focusing on permits, air, water, and waste permits, but we also manage natural resources, right? So we have a division of fish and wildlife, and we have a division of parks, and so that's kind of that's the tie-in for recreation. And so the original environmental justice legislation, executive order was during the Clinton administration. It's Executive Order 12898. And this really was about addressing meaningful engagement. So really making sure that people were able to meaningfully engage in decisions that were impacting their lived environment, the built environment. And so most of that was around permitting. So really just permitting actions and kind of just making sure that people were able to engage in that process. And we've done a lot of that on our control side, environmental control side, to make sure people have access to our processes. During the Biden-Harris administration, you had Executive Order 14096, right? And this is this environmental justice for all. And this is really this whole of government approach, right? Kind of looking at, all of the different things that have systemically created environmental injustice, right? So you think about, particularly in some of the urban areas and some of the rural areas where you see you can see this manifesting in the built environment with particular land uses and polluting land uses. So this is kind of looking at all of these things, and it's calling up systemic racism and things of the sort. But if you look at some of the legislation that has come subsequent or right preceding this executive order is a lot of federal funding and other laws that are bolstering environmental justice, right? That especially as it can relate to parks. And so that's one thing to think about, right? Because this particular executive order is acknowledging racial discrimination, segregation, redlining, zoning things that have created these pockets of where people have no access to the outdoors. And so, and we know that a lot of this, a lot of this access to outdoor recreation became apparent during the COVID pandemic, right? Where it was like, that was the only thing you could do is recreate. But we found that in many cities, there was no access to recreation. Maybe in some rural areas, there was difficulty getting to some of these places of recreation. Then we also found that, oh, wow, let's say you could arrive at a national park or a state park, how are you going to be received in that park? Were you going to be welcome? Were you going to be able to enjoy the park just like everyone else was enjoying the park? And so that kind of came out, this Outdoors for All Act, right? So Outdoors for All kind of originated kind of in California, and it's kind of just trying to make sure that, federal funding is going towards communities that don't have adequate access to local parks, right? Helping cities grow their recreational resources. And then you also have the Federal Interagency Council on Outdoor Recreation from 2022 that also is about improving access to nature, expanding outdoor recreation opportunities, and providing the public with improved and more affordable experiences on America's public lands. And why does this matter, right? Because we know that parks, because of the trees and other parts of the ecosystem that are there, they provide ecological services, right? So we all know, right? So there's air and water infiltration, right? There's wildlife habitat. You're helping with climate change. It's a carbon sink. It's helping with, evapotranspiration. There's all these different things, right? There's recreation for fishing and hunting, right? There's also a whole body of literature about nature RX, right? So the physical and mental health, right? Just from going and being outdoors, right? Educational opportunities, experiential learning, cultural we could just go on and on and on about how many ecological benefits a park can provide. But it's who gets to benefit from these, right? Who gets to use the parks? Who are the parks geared towards, right? So those are things for us to consider. And so that begs the question, does wealth equal health? Is equity really equality? And then what about place and opportunity, right? And so making sure that everyone can benefit from these things, right? Because we find in cities higher rates of respiratory problems. We also find in a lot of cities, in some rural areas, higher rates of chronic illnesses, right? That are lifestyle illnesses, diabetes, hypertension, these things that are because you don't have the ability to get out and move, right? And so in Parks and Recreation magazine in November 2018, they created this really cool infographic about parks and health equity, right? Thinking about the access to material resource, your enhanced social environment, and how that relates to what are the outcomes that are going to support health equity. And it all ties back to parks because really parks in many ways are the missing link, right? So when you have campaigns that are looking to get people, public health campaigns, right? A lot of times the park or the park system can work hand in hand with the state or local public health agency to kind of promote physical activity, right? And safe physical activity. And so when we think about public lands, right? State parks, national parks, we know that the establishment of these lands, they don't have the best history, particularly the national parks. We know that they removed the Indian population. They're not. Nobody's embarrassed about this, right? Like I was at the Grand Canyon, and they literally said it. And so we know that in some state parks, we had segregation, right? So like even here in Delaware, there was a black beach, right? That has, called Jason's Beach or whatever. So we have all of that. We've seen that around the country where you've had segregated natural resources, and they were not always equal, right? And so this legacy of segregation kind of shows up sometimes even in current day usage of parks. And so when we think about the nature gap, the Center for American Progress in July 2020 said increasing exposure to the outdoors for young children could help break the vicious cycle of nature deprivation that contributes to many excluded communities being locked out of conservation, employment, and leadership opportunities. Because, you can't be what you can't see. And what we find, and there's no pipeline, right? So there's no, I'm not, you can probably look across your state agency, your state parks, and figure out who's represented in the careers, right? So if you do have minorities in careers, what are their careers, right? Are they regulated to just the labor, right? The janitorial staff, the maintenance, or do they have higher positions, right? And so just kind of connecting children with the outdoors, and following a pipeline, right? Connecting with middle schools and high schools to kind of get students interested in environmental education, stewardship, and things of the sort can change who's working in these spaces and how we're able to support the customers. And that brings me to my final point of customer service as an environmental justice tool. And the thing about it is, good customer service is good environmental justice, as I said in the beginning, right? Making sure that all visitors feel welcome, right? Making sure that whenever somebody comes in, they're greeted with a smile. Making sure that you have signage. If you're in a state or town that has a non-English speaking population, making sure that when they show up at your park, there's wayfinding that they're able to navigate, right? That they can buy if you have need a park pass or a permit or whatever, make sure those applications are translated into other languages so that they can understand that the park is for them. When there's issues, make sure that your law enforcement or your park officers have cultural sensitivity training, are bilingual, or have a way to call and get online interpretation services so that people are feeling welcome. And I'll just read you maybe one thing from this slide that I had. And so it says, even after parks like Shenandoah were desegregated in the 1960s, people of color have not always felt welcome at national parks. Those feelings of uneasy persist today. A 2012 study titled, "Why Do So Few Minority People Visit National Parks?" found that Asian Americans, African Americans, and Hispanics often feel uncomfortable when going to parks. Meanwhile, some white visitors reported discomfort when around non-white visitors. And then I have other examples, but I won't sit here and read them to you guys. But those are the things to consider, right? So is it a welcome and inclusive environment for all people, right? So do you have, even if you think about something simple, like, what we have here in Delaware is on some of our, our beaches are a part of our park system as well. We have the blue mats, right? The blue mats, which are for ADA, right? To kind of help a wheelchair go, traverse the sand to access the beach. But guess what? Those blue mats help everybody, because now someone can pull a cooler or a wagon with all their gear across that. So, when you're thinking about this inclusive customer service, you think about it in terms of how does it benefit everybody, right? Because these are public, these public lands are funded most of the time with public funds, right? And so all people should be able to benefit, get all the ecological benefits from these facilities. And I guess that's all I have.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Moore. I find this fascinating. And what in some of our preparation for this, some of the things that came to light is that it's also very complicated. If you think back at your systems back home, think about some of the complexities of your park system and how it's created and how it was created. And just some of those things that we've talked about with inclusion and trying to reach a diverse group of citizens and visitors. So, what I'd like to do now is kind of shift it to see like what's going on back home. And Susan Buxton, the director of Idaho State Parks, is hopefully still with us. Susan, you're still with us?
I am.
Thank you for holding and being patient while we take on these challenges of technology. But a little bit about Susan. Susan is the director of Idaho State Parks and Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation. She's been the director since 2020. Before coming to Idaho Parks and Recreation, she was the administrator of the Idaho Division of Human Resources. And prior to joining state government, Susan enjoyed a varied and successful legal career representing government and private clients in matters of law in the areas of natural resources, water and the environment, real estate and land use. But what in our conversation, Susan, what I thought was very fascinating is some of the things that you're dealing with on the ground in Idaho, that when you talk about this big picture of environmental justice, and then when you bring it home to having to manage and deal with these things, it's really complicated. And it's and when you really have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis and you look at it, it becomes very complicated, but it also is very impactful as a steward who's managing this resource. And so I've got your slides keyed up, and maybe we could just talk about some of the things that you're dealing with in Idaho. And your first slide is, number of people you serve and how many visitors you have each year, and kind of a map of where Idaho is.
Yeah, Phil, thank you, or Professor Gaines, thanks for inviting us, or inviting me to be on. And Dr. Moore, really you did an amazing job to kind of defining what's going on, what is environmental justice, and what we're all struggling with nationwide. And it's something. One example that I'm talking to Professor Gaines was that there's some things that keep happening, and it keeps happening with the land use, with outdoor recreation, with a whole bunch of developments that people want to put out, and how that affects minorities and unrepresented or less represented groups, whether it be in our, and I've got an example I'm going to talk about that's a current example, and it's a current kind of a battle for the administration to deal with between the National Park Service, the BLM, both parts of the Department of Interior. And we have a state park that's impacted, communities are impacted, the state's impacted, and then the Minidoka National Historic Site, which is a site many of you may not have ever heard of, but just recently Travel and Leisure magazine named Minidoka National Historic Sites as one of the best hidden gems at the National Park Service as number 7. And it is in southern Idaho. It is one of the historic Japanese internment camps from World War II. And I think there was about 13,000 Japanese Americans and nationals from Alaska, Oregon, Washington, California, who were incarcerated there without due process for nearly 4 years. And so it's a very important place to them. It was established in 2002. And now there's a facility, you'll see one of the maps talking about Lava Ridge Wind Project. So kind of look at that picture of me. You've got on the screen, you see me on a horse. And I've got some folks behind me on horses. That's the first slide, Bill. And that's kind of what the sagebrush steppe looks like in Idaho. And it's called part of the Great Basin that goes all the way from Idaho down into Utah and Wyoming and Nevada and parts of Colorado. So it's just absolutely huge. And it supports a lot of things. We're seeing the loss of about 1 million acres of sagebrush land in the United States every year to development. And this one particular area, there's a map. So it's in southern Idaho. You see the bottom of Idaho on that map right there. It's kind of down kind of at the the bottom, right where you're right there. You kind of you see Walcott State Park. Go up one more, up a little higher, right in there, that area. That's Walcott State Park is right on the Snake River. So anyway, it is part of the migratory bird flyway, and it's a migratory refuge and a wildlife refuge, and it will also be impacted by 800 foot windmills, over 450 of them over 10,000 acres of BLM lands. It's within 1 mile of the Minidoka internment camp, a historic site. So the entire state of Idaho is opposed to this because of that environmental injustice that would be keeping on to the Japanese Americans that were affected there. And it's kind of from what Dr. Moore is talking about, you just see this continuing. And there's always we think we need these renewable energy, with the idea that you would they say, well, we'll wheel all this energy from Idaho to California, and you can all imagine how happy anybody is about that. And then even the scientific way, whether that actually can actually really happen. The energy is not needed in this area. It's not highly populated, but many of the Japanese Americans actually stayed after the internment camp was closed. So I just want to give a shout out to Dr. Moore and her work. When I was the HR director for the state of Idaho, I got to be acquainted with and consider her a very close colleague, is Sandra Johnson, who was the HR director for Delaware. And hopefully, Dr. Moore, if you're still listening, tell her hello for me. She was just a wonderful friend I could call whenever I needed to talk to someone. But I guess to see that these things continue, part of customer service, and the National Park Service is really kind of caught in a quandary here with its with its own policies with its own administration. There's a very big outcry from the Japanese Americans about this, and this is just one example of how these things continue, and how the social injustice, even for the rural people in that area, that there's a large Hispanic population also there that is opposing this because it will change the whole viewshed. Kind of want to read how one of the descendants of some of the folks from whose parents were in this internment camp said that let's see, were they looking at the kind of the wrong thing here, but they basically said, we walked gravel paths from the visitor center, housed in a historic warehouse, the historic root cellar, and in block 22, they had, like I said, over 13,000 people there. We stood under large witness trees that provided shade to the ball field during those times when they were there. And, you walk through the sagebrush, see birds of prey soaring overhead, and see for miles in the distance to the far mountains in eastern and central Idaho. And so it's just, the view sheds are expansive. That's what we call it, the big sky country. You kind of see everything from there, and you'll see the windmills are taller than the Space Needle in Seattle. The impact to, like I said, the migratory birds, the flight paths of those birds, it really hasn't been discussed well enough. The scientific issues about what does vibration do to ungulates. There's huge herds of pronghorn and mule deer, pronghorn antelope, or if you've never seen where they're kind of neat, they're an ancestor or kind of somehow related to giraffes. They're not as big as giraffes, really little actually, but they do have some similarities, I guess, to some of their DNA. Also, the question of what is the impact, the physical impact of all the flickering when those wind turbines go around and around, it's constant light flickering, that how that affects people. There's some studies showing that you'll have a deformation of the ungulate's hoofs. And there's just a lot of these things that that they're really not getting to the bottom of, and how that affects those people that live there, those people that have lived there, the history of it, and how does that history get really marred by the loss of the viewshed of that area. And this is just, like I said, one example. I can give a lot others. I've been working with several tribes just even the last couple of days with some of our parks that were part of their ancestral lands, and how we work with them, how we identify the acknowledgements that they like or that are accurate, and working with them on that so that everybody's included, and but at the same time they identify really which peoples were there, and just kind of the issues between that. So there's always some disagreements that you have to work through, and to try and make sure that everybody gets the right interpretation, and at the same time that everyone feels welcome, because we want that very much. Customer service is the top thing. As I saw in one of my slides, we talked about, Idaho has less than 2 million people in the entire state. But since 2020, we have just in our parks, we have 30 parks across the state of Idaho. Idaho has 60% of its land masses, 63% of its land masses is federal lands. And so our parks are really just trailheads to most of these federal lands. And we've served over 28 million visitors just in the last 2.5 years. So I've talked a lot about some of these things, and I'm happy to talk more about it. But my concern is that we continue down the road of social injustice. And I guess we have to prioritize certain things over others, but I think we really need to do it without working so quickly sometimes, and really looking at what are we trying. We need to avoid having these social injustices just keep continuing.
Yeah, and what I've gotten out of some of this is some of the things that you don't know how to categorize of what it is this environmental justice new term that we're learning is it really impacts a lot of the things that we do, and sometimes we take for granted some of the responsibility that we have as stewards in America's state parks of some of these legacy components that we've inherited to take care of and be stewards, from indigenous people to some of the things that happened. The Japanese plight in Idaho is like, I was blown away by that, and never would have thought about that. But again, it goes back to this broader picture of environmental justice and some of the things that we can do as stewards and managers of America's parklands to be able to make a difference. So fascinating stuff, very complicated, a lot of things going on with that. And that being said, I'm going to see if I can find my chat box here, which I've not been able to do good. This thing has just really not been a good day for me here on the Zoom link from the get-go. So if we have any questions, let's see if we can get to some questions and see if anybody has anything. And I'm going to quit sharing and go to the chat room. If anybody has any questions, I'll open that up in the chat. If not, let's see here. If anybody has a question, if you'll pop it up in the chat, and I'll see if I can.
Phil, this is Susan again. I noticed that my chat was disabled.
Yeah, see, I don't know what's going on with all this stuff that's been disabled, and your microphone worked and hers didn't. So, I apologize for all that. We'll figure out how to do that and get better on the next go round. If it is disabled, then I will kind of draw this thing to an end, and thank Director Buxton and Dr. Moore for coming on and kind of opening up the door for us to think about what environmental justice is and how it relates back to our role as stewards of America's parks, and from a customer service standpoint, but also from that legacy standpoint that we've been passed on to take care of, and to remind folks why our places that we protect are so very special. I thought I had a chat pop up, but I can't get to it. So excellent, Phil. So I apologize for all this. We'll provide some more information on this. And in the meantime, as we come to a conclusion of this webinar, if you have any ideas about some topics for webinars, please don't hesitate to email that to me or to Lewis Ledford. And my email address is spgaines without the S. So SPGAINE at clemson.edu. And most folks know how to get in touch with Lewis. And we'll look forward to seeing and hearing from you on that end. And Susan, thank you so much. I apologize for all the technology issues that came up. Dr. Moore had to leave as well. So thank you guys for your patience today, and we'll see you next time. And I'll see you in the parks. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Apologize for all this.
No worries. I loved it. It's great.
Thank you so much.